there, a friend of mine recommended that I should join Reddit and tell this story here. What I am about to describe will sound like a cheap as cliché movie script. But this did indeed happen. Even at home barely anybody believes me without confirmation from the other parties involved. Buckle up, it's a long haul. Autumn 2019 in British Columbia, Canada. I am from Germany, but spent half a year in Canada as part of my bachelor's degree. I barely got back before COVID hit. I was 22 years old at the time, and the other people involved were about the same age. Another foreign student and I befriended this local Canadian student. We all had the same interests and humor, and the dude became a very good friend of ours. He told us all about the local area, and we spent a week in the summer with him and his father at their very remote, remember this, cabin near some woods. They taught us how to handle guns there and let us shoot a lot. Ammo is expensive AF. Then fall came and we had a lot of free time due to being finished with all our papers. So our buddy proposed that we spent a few days at his dad's cabin, this time without his father. We went hell yeah because we could load up on booze and weed and have a great time there. Just living the life. 3 close dudes in the woods gaming and getting wasted. Sound great, right? After loading up on all the supplies, the first 3 days were very calm. On the first day, just like the last time I was there, I barely slept and was generally tense. This is because I am a naturally very paranoid guy, and I often go into alert mode in situations, which is often mocked by my friends. In this case, what freaked me out the most was the fact that we were far away from civilization. And you never understand how quiet your surroundings can be until you spend some time in a remote area like this. Which led to me often just standing in the dark at night, listening to the surroundings of the cabin. But after the first few days I got less paranoid. After all, I was with friends, was constantly high, and we were quite armed and dangerous, probably most dangerous to ourselves though. Day 4 came. We spent the day attempting to hunt in the woods. Mostly just chilling under trees with a beer and rifle in hand. But in the evening it started to rain heavily. After an hour we were starting to see lightning in the distance, with quite a bit of time passing between lightning and thunder, which meant the thunderstorm itself was still some time away. So we aborted our incompetent hunting attempts and started trekking back to the cabin. It took us about an hour to reach it, due to it already being very dark and the rain creating unsafe footing. For context, you should know that once you spent a few days in the wilderness and haven't seen a soul other than your friends for days, you can become quite careless about your surroundings. I think you can imagine why I am telling you that last part. So we enter the cabin. At that time the thunderstorm was raging full on. We put away our gear and changed clothes. Except for our guns. Yeah, I know, drugs and guns are a horrible combination and I wouldn't mix that shit nowadays, but we were drilled quite well by Canadian friends' dad regarding trigger discipline, safety, etc. And man, I really miss spooning a rifle while sleeping. We cozied down in the living room at a table, started a YouTube video and began playing cards. Barely 20 minutes passed since we returned. And at the time, we didn't bother closing the curtains in the living room because thunderstorms are baller AF. So imagine that we were 3 guys sitting around a table, occasionally in awe at the weather outside while playing cards. In such a remote place, it is extremely dark outside. Without a full moon and clear skies, it is pitch black. The only lamps we have are old-ass vintage looking, and dimmer than my phone screen. What comes next is how my also non-local friend has described what he saw. While sipping from his beer, another lightning went off. He spit it out instantly after the lightning came and screamed loudly and stood up. No words, just the sound of panic. My Canadian friend and I were instantly perplexed and looked at him. There is somebody outside. He started rambling about how in that split second the lightning illuminated the outside of the cabin. He saw a person standing a bit of distance away from the cabin, looking directly at us. Now this is what I meant when I said cliché horror story. And barely anybody believes me at first. But this did happen. My non-local friend is obviously in full-on panic. His face looks anxious. This communicated to our Canadian buddy and me that this guy wasn't just messing with us. He did see somebody outside. I grabbed my rifle and pulled the bolt to rack around into the chamber. I feel that warm sensation running down my spine of my body releasing adrenaline. I try to stay far away from the window, stare into the darkness outside, but I can't see anything. While our Canadian friend rushed into his room to grab his pistol, I start panicking even more because I realize we didn't lock the door. Why would we? We haven't seen anyone in days and are in the middle of wilderness. So I run to the door and lock it. Our friend returns with his pistol, which he grabbed because there was a flashlight attached to it. He carefully approached the window, then changed his pace from sneaky to fast and pushed the window open with one hand, while the other hand was aiming the handgun outside. I wish I was any good at drawing. Because what we saw next when our friend turned on the flashlight was the most terrifying image I have ever seen. It is burned into my mind. The fact that I cannot share that image with other people has been bugging me for 3 years now. The light turns on. What we saw in that moment was a man, tall and slim, dressed in all black, with a hooded raincoat which he has pulled over his head, almost covering his eyes. But not far away from the cabin, just a few steps away from the window. Not standing as our friend yelled earlier, but crouching. Looking directly at us with clenched eyes and a fucking terrifying little smirk on one side of his mouth. Another lightning flashes, and for that moment we were all frozen. The image of what we saw must have shocked the other guys as much as it did me, because nobody said anything for a few seconds. There is a hard-to-explain dreadful feeling about seeing something like this. In a storm, in the middle of nowhere, a person dressed in a black raincoat is suddenly crouching so close to you. And facing you. Our Canadian buddy was aiming his pistol plus attached flashlight at the also frozen crouched smirking man and just yelled out, with a slight stutter and a higher pitched voice than I've ever heard from him. "Gee, get the fuck away from us or we will shoot." I guess at that moment after his eyes adjusted, the Raincoat Man realized that this was not just a flashlight, but a gun. And I was standing next to my friend with a hunting rifle in my arm. Raincoat Man's slight smirk changed to something where I am unsure if it was shock or rage. All this was happening in less than a minute. While my friend kept on yelling, and I was just frozen, the raincoat figure turned by about 90 degrees towards the nearest tree line, and went from crouch to full sprint quickly. He ran away to the right side of our window. Two of us poked their head out of the window to see where exactly he was going, but with the heavy rainfall and darkness we could barely make out anything in the distance of that tree line. After a few minutes of just looking at each other in disbelief, we decided to pop off a few rounds outside the window, to prove that we were for real and to cope. When the shock wore off, we decided to call the police. They asked a lot of questions on the phone to describe the location of the cabin and a description of the man who just almost crept up on us, totally unsuspecting and only revealed due to lightning and luck. Due to us being in such a remote area, the cops told us it'd take at least 1 or 2 hours for somebody to come out. They asked because of the weather and time, if it'd be alright if they send somebody out tomorrow to talk to us about all the details. Given how the man saw that we were armed, he probably wouldn't come back again. We agreed. We discussed just jumping in the truck and leaving right now. But us dumbass were too lazy to refuel the truck. The idea of doing this now, in the dark and in that heavy rain, was just too frightening. I kept thinking about this guy lurking in the darkness and picking us off one by one. We spent the night sleeping in shifts. One person was awake and standing guard, the others at least attempted to sleep. When my turn came, the rain had died down. I turned off all the lights, opened a window, and just sat there in the darkness, trying to listen for any sound I could hear, and looking out of the windows to scan the area. Let me tell you, when you're sitting in the dark for hours in full alert mode, just trying sit still, listen and look around, you have a lot of time to think and reiterate what just happened. Close to the middle of the next day, 2 cops arrived. We had to give them a detailed report of what happened, when it happened, and had to show them in which direction the raincoat shade ran off to. They said they will organize for a patrol to comb through the woods, but that might take a while because they need experienced outdoorsmen, etc. Sadly, we didn't see many details of the man's face. We couldn't tell if he was young or old, only that he was tall and clean-shaven. The chances of finding who exactly that was, and find out what the hell he was attempting to do, were very small. Though one of the officers expressed that this whole happening was deeply worrying. We left the cabin a few hours after the police left, and Canadian guy's dad insisted we stay at his place at least for a day until we feel safe again. He also wanted to hear every last detail and figured that the time has come to install cameras around the cabin. I don't remember this part for sure, but I believe that I heard later the dad and his brother went back to the cabin and just sat there in the dark, waiting for the Raincoat Man to return. But I never heard of any results, so I guess he must have gone hunting in other areas. I never heard from them cops again. Next January I left Canada and returned home. My Canadian friend was called in for an interview a few months later. And it seemed like the police were still seriously investigating this, looking for the guy who crept up on a cabin during a thunderstorm. The image of that crouched raincoat figure, completely wet and surrounded by darkness, so close to our cabin, is burned into my mind. I will most likely never forget this. I still sometimes turn off all the lights and just look out the windows in silence, trying to listen for sounds. Even though I am on the other side of the world now. We have speculated a lot about what that was. The winning theory is that this guy most certainly had sinister intentions. This did not look like just an attempt at burglary. Remember, we had dim lights on, you could see that there was somebody inside the cabin. This guy was creeping towards us in a raincoat during a thunderstorm. When my friend yelled out that he saw somebody, this guy went from walking, standing to crouching. And he went closer towards the window. I suspect the Raincoat Man wanted to check what kind of victim was on the menu. And I don't really want to imagine what he had in store if there were two unarmed girls there, in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We didn't see any headlights passing the clearing the cabin was on. The guy also had no backpack or something. Just the raincoat and black weather-appropriate clothing. I'd bet my soul that this guy was a man on a mission, who knew exactly what he was doing and what he was well prepared for. While writing this post, I also started thinking about the logistics of it all. The guy must have a camp or at least a car hidden somewhere in those woods. You can't sustain yourself out there otherwise. I also got the feeling that he either came upon the cabin during the storm itself, or that he spotted us in the woods during the hunting we did before. We moved slowly, while also not being shy with waving our lights around. And in total pitch darkness wilderness, a proper flashlight must have been as easy to spot as the beacons of Gonda. So he might have tracked us through the woods until we reached the cabin. If anybody has heard about similar things happening in the area of British Columbia near Vancouver, please let me know. That mystery has a grip on me for the rest of my life. Sometimes I still dream of this raincoat figure creeping closer towards me with each flash of lightning.